January 6, 2020 work session of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Mr. Trivette, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin?
Here.
Ms. Ramsey?
Here.
Mayor Freiling?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Here.
Mr. Zhang?
Here.
Items for City Council meeting of January 9th, 2020, council preview. Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to share with us?
Well, it's such a weighty agenda, I'm not sure where to start. But we only have the one item under new business, and that's consideration and authorization for award of bid for demolition of 1800 Richmond Road.
Any questions? Okay. With that, we'll move to public comment. Anybody who would like to address council on any of the items or the item coming up before us at our Thursday meeting, we welcome you to come forward. Offer your name and address. 5 minutes? Nobody? Okay. We'll move on to background presentations and discussion. We have 5 of those today. The first is a presentation concerning the 2019 activity of Old Town Medical and Dental Center. Dr. Bill Mann. Welcome, Dr. Mann.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. Yep. We've had a very busy year, 15,836 patient visits, and we are currently on schedule for this year to have 16,050 visits. 77.6% of our patients were uninsured. However, after the Medicaid eligibility expansion, that number has fallen to 67.7%, which is the lowest it's been in about 5 years. In the past, about 7.2% of our patients had Medicare. Now it's 7.8%. And we at one time had Medicaid and managed care Medicaid 12.8%, that has now risen to 18.7%. Our volume is made up of both medical and dental visits. Our medical visits represent 76.2% of our visits and our dental 23.8%. Because so few patients have dental insurance, 98% of our dental visits are on patients who are uninsured. Our average visits per month has been 1,320 with a range of 1,079 to 1,796. Demographics of our population are interesting. 6.6% below the age of 18, 84.4% between 19 and 64, and 9% over the age of 65. So we are not seeing a graying of the population at Old Town. What we are taking care of at Old Town are the people between the ages of 19 and 64. As you'd expect in a clinic like ours, 2/3 of our patients are female, 1/3 male. Racial breakdown is shown on the slide. 36.3% of our patients are at or below the federal poverty level, and 48.8% are at or below 138%. And as you know, Medicaid kicks in for 137% and below. Patient programs that we currently run. Our dental program consists of 3 part-time dentists, 2 part-time hygienists, 2 full-time dental assistants, and 5 volunteer dentists from the community. And we are now pleased to be open 40 hours a week with our dental care. We also now integrate oral health care into the management of our diabetic patients, and also we offer free oral health exams and care to all of our pregnant patients. Our medical service is made up of 5 full-time nurse practitioners, 2 part-time providers, our obstetrician and our psychiatrist, 11 volunteer providers, and 17 support staff. Those 11 volunteer providers are physicians in the community who for free come to our clinic and see our uninsured patients. And our medical clinic is open 44 hours a week, and we are pleased that we now offer walk-in appointments, so you do not have to have an appointment to be seen. And this has had a big impact on patients showing up at the local emergency rooms. Those numbers have fallen down for things like upper respiratory infections or minor complaints. These are the wide range of services that we provide to our patients. Pediatrics, prenatal care, gynecology, psych, labs, retinopathy screening. The Lions Clubs from James City and from Williamsburg have done a wonderful job helping us purchase equipment, so we're now able to offer very sophisticated eye exams. And we have wonderful optometrists and ophthalmologists in the community who for free have volunteered to come to our clinic and see these patients, and we're able to obtain free glasses for these patients. We're also reaching out to the school systems to let them know that if they identify children that need glasses but can't afford them, we can now help those children. We also offer the cardiology, sports medicine, HIV/AIDS management, again using a contract that we have with Eastern Virginia Medical School. and we're also working on patient literacy and medical education. We have something called a medication assistance program where we're able to obtain free brand name and free generic drugs for our patients so that they can fill their prescriptions. Last year, 915 patients, 5,889 requests, and $5 million and more worth of drugs were dispensed. Now, with the increase in Medicaid availability, we've seen a drop off on this because patients who have Medicaid are not eligible for the free drugs that are provided by the pharmaceutical industry. But we still continue to see a significant number of patients needing these free medications. We've also started to expand our outreach program. We've worked with the Chamber of Commerce. We saw the uninsured employees of Colonial Williamsburg. We've also seen reaching out to the organization that represents the hotels and motels in town. We've held health fairs for all of their employees who do not have health insurance. We also provide medical care now at the House of Mercy, which is a service for the homeless people of the community. And we've been working with York County Head Start to provide lead screenings and oral health exams, and we will be expanding that offer to James City County, Williamsburg City Public Schools. We've also collaborated with the Tri-County Pastors Health Expo, which is 13 hospitals, again, for their uninsured members of their parishes to screen for diabetes, hypertension, and obesity. We've worked with the Association for the Elderly to do low-income housing site visits, and we're also going into some retirement facilities and offering screening and, in particular, access to dental care. We're also going to be at the JCC Williamsburg City's kindergarten roundup, and what we do here is hearing tests, oral health exams. We also make sure that the children are up on their immunizations, which we can provide at our clinic. And we also at the ARC are doing health screenings for intellectually impaired patients. We also have a little presence at the second Sunday where we try to just let everybody in the community know where we are. What lies ahead for us is increased emphasis on patient education and medication literacy. We're always looking for more medical and dental volunteers, and we're also looking for nurse volunteers, if you know of anyone. We started using something called the Maven Project, which gives us access to consultants and educational programs and CME for our staff at a very reasonable cost. We also now use something called Catch-A-Fire, which gives us access to free consultants to help us with things like translations, creation of brochures, and they also give us offer strategic advice if we come up with issues we'd like to have them deal with. The next thing we're going to do, which we think is going to be kind of exciting, is we're going to try to offer open scheduling for dental patients so that patients that do not have a dentist, have an acute event, will be able to come in without an appointment and be seen. And we appreciate greatly the support that we've received from the City of Williamsburg, and thank you very much. I'll take any questions if you have them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mann. You covered quite a bit of ground in a very short period of time.
Try to.
He's good.
I'll come to my colleagues for questions.
Well, you heard about Thursday being brief. You wanted to make Monday brief as well. So thank you, Dr. Mann, for being here. As always, we applaud the efforts that you all go through to provide, quality health care to those that need in our community. You talk about 2019 numbers. Is that an increase in terms of patients over 18?
Yes.
And
There's about a 600 or 700 increase, and this year we expect to see almost 1,000 increase.
Yeah, good. Well, that is good that people are aware that you're there and they can get the services that they need. When you talk about education, I think that's a big part of what you all can do, because with education becomes prevention. And I guess that's what you mean by providing that education for healthcare?
That's correct. And in addition, we have an arrangement with Hampton University School of Pharmacy, PharmD students. We have about 70 to 75% of our patients have chronic medical diseases, and the average patient is on 3 or more drugs. A typical doctor's office has 15% chronic diseases. So our patients have a lot of medications they're taking, and what the PharmD students do is they sit down and go over the charts to make sure that there are no drug interactions, side effects, that the dosages are appropriate, and then they'll call the patients and spend an hour with them, usually face-to-face, making sure they understand why they're taking the medicine, what to do if they miss a medication, etc. And then they put these notes into our electronic health record so that the next time the provider sees the patient, they can reinforce what they've been told about their medications.
And I guess also just in terms of wellness, like you need to stop smoking, get a little
That's correct.
exercise, and those types of things.
That's correct.
Well, thank you again for your efforts, and I
Appreciate it, sir.
being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Mann, for your informative presentations. I did have a couple questions. A few years ago, and I think there's generally a perception out there that while we do target low income and perhaps the poor, actually, in fact, what we see is, I think from last time you said, 95% of the patients you do see are working some sort, they're
Correct.
employed.
Yes, and many of them work more than one job.
Right, and this is just an illustration of a wonderful resource where, you know, they might hesitate to go to an emergency room or urgent care or just a primary doctor because of the bill they'll see, but they can rest assuredly go to the clinic knowing that they can receive quality health care and find a way to pay for it.
That's great. We do not have a collection agency, and nobody is turned away for inability to pay.
No one is turned away from it,
No.
whether they have if they're insured with Medicare,
Medicaid, managed Medicaid.
Right.
Or just no insurance at all.
Right, and I appreciate all that you've done from the preventive healthcare side. Sometimes it's quite reactive where you just go in because you have an abscessed tooth and you need to get that get a filling or something to that matter. But this is a nice integration, and I think it's been supported by a lot of community members of trying to promote that preventative care aspect of it. So I appreciate your leadership on it. In terms of just a quick comment, I think this just comes to show Old Town, you obviously have other organizations like Lackey Free Clinic, you have the House of Mercy, but what Old Town makes it really unique is the fact that they have a healthcare net for the historic Triangle area. And, you know, many, many decades ago, even before I was a resident here, we had the Williamsburg Hospital here in the city, and it moved on with Centera to other parts of James City County. And it's a beautiful facility, but we still have Old Town Medical Center. Our primary economy is driven by service industry. Healthcare, as we've seen, is kind of sometimes on the back burner for some of the employers, especially with rising premiums. We are so lucky as a community to have a facility like Old Town to provide the programs for its residents, for the working class, for the employed, and maybe even for the unemployed. So I appreciate the holistic aspect. I appreciate the impact on public health, the epidemiological side from it, and I also appreciate your management of it. Ultimately, it is a nonprofit. There's going to be some money lost, but ultimately, given your managerial leadership, you've been able to steer the ship, and I hope we continue to see that in the years to come. So thank you, Dr. Mann.
Thank you.
And I would just make a brief comment that the presentation I felt was very helpful, not only to us, but also to members of the public who might be watching or who might want to pull it up later to see your information. And it just brings to the forefront the value and importance that Old Town provides to the community. And I applaud all of the expanded services that you provide and your innovative ways of spreading the word to patients. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Can you give us an update on the burden of the additional paperwork you're expecting with the Medicaid expansion? And also, do we still have the issue where, you know, the doctors or the providers that are being assigned need to be, you know, reallocated?
The paperwork burden, everything's electronic now, so we've got that fairly smooth. What you're addressing about the providers, that is a real time consumer. In theory, a patient is assigned to a medical managed care organization 90 days after they receive Medicaid. In reality, a lot of those patients are being assigned almost immediately. Many of our patients don't know that they've been assigned. And if you're assigned to an MCO, a managed care organization, only that MCO can provide you with medical care, and only that MCO can order tests, diagnostic tests, blood tests. So the patients will come to us not knowing that they're not, we take all the MCOs, but if they're not assigned to us, we can't provide their care. What we can do the first 15 days of each month is sit with them, then it takes approximately an hour, and they can call up and they can change so that we become their MCO of choice. But it takes an hour per patient, can only be done the first 15 days of the month, and you're trying to explain to patients who average have a 6th grade education what a managed care organization is. That's where the real time consumption comes in on our staff.
Thank you.
Again, Dr. Mann, on behalf of my colleagues, we very much appreciate everything that you and the entire staff at Old Town do. And just a couple of very quick questions. Do you have any connection to the dental hygiene program at Thomas Nelson? Or
Their hygienists rotate, their students rotate through our service during the course of the year.
That's great. I mean, they have when they first opened that facility, they had tours, and it was really impressive.
It's a very, very
what
nice
they had
facility.
on campus.
Very good students also.
And with the 11 doctors you have as volunteers, is there any commonality between them? Are they in the latter part of their career where they've cut back a practice, or are they just all over the spectrum?
It's all over the spectrum.
That's very impressive, too, that they're willing to give of their time.
Yes.
And we all in the community owe them a great debt for that. Has the connection to House of Mercy helped you reach new audiences?
We are reaching out to a group of people that otherwise don't seem to get care at all. So in that sense, it's a new audience. The struggle with these patients is they have profound behavioral health issues. And we're looking to figure out how we can get them more access to psychiatric care or psychological counseling. They have significant medical problems, but trying to get compliance with management is very difficult.
Well, again, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Our next presentation today is by the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. Dick Phillips, Director. Welcome, Mr. Phillips.
Well, let's see if I know how to use these gadgets. I'm just going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to introduce Robin Gold, who is going to actually give the presentation. She's much more qualified in that basis than I am. I just make a brief introduction of who I am and why I've been around the city for, 25 years now. I know a good many of the people on the council. I've known people in the planning board over the years. I've worked for projects for the city, for Colonial Williamsburg, for College of William and Mary. In fact, I spent 8 years with the College of William and Mary. My specialty is stormwater management and environmental services, if you want to say. I've worked on many projects over the year. I believe that it's very critical that we pay attention to our water and our water supply. I think of all the things we talk about, that is the singular most important thing that we've got to care for. And I believe that that's the program that, I know that's the program that soil and water conservation districts have been serving. Over the years, they've changed from different government, federal level agencies as doing the funding, but the goal has always been the same, is soil and water conservation. It's been very successful on the agricultural side. It's only in the last few years that we started to recognize and move into the urban side. And that's basically what Robin's going to talk to you about tonight, what we've done and where we're going. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello, thanks for having us. My name is Robin Goad. I am a staff member at the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District, and I manage our urban and suburban programming. So just a brief overview about what the district is. We are a political subdivision of the state, so we are not quite at the state level agency, but we do work with several localities in our day-to-day work. We are one of 47 districts in Virginia, so almost every locality in Virginia is covered by a soil and water conservation district. Those that are not are the larger cities that don't historically have any agricultural use. At the Colonial District, we serve James City County, New Kent County, York County, Charles City County, and the city of Williamsburg. So we have 5 localities that we work with. 75%, the majority of our funding comes from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. The rest of the 25% is typically provided by the localities that we work with, and then whatever grants we're able to receive each year. So the purpose of the presentation today, we wanted to provide a background about what the district does both broadly and specifically in the city of Williamsburg, so that as you approach the budgeting season and you see a budget request from the Soil and Water Conservation District, you'll have an idea of what we've been able to do with the funds that the city provides. So one of our biggest programs is our education program. We have a couple of different projects that we work with in the education realm. One of the biggest is the Envirothon program, which is a sort of a natural resources competition for high school students. We have one team in the Colonial District, the Jamestown High School team. You might be aware that in 2019 they won the international competition, which is just incredible. They beat teams from all across the country, and I believe there were teams from Canada and China as well, and they took home that top spot. So we don't claim any of their credit. All credit goes to the students, but we are fortunate to get to work with them through that program. We also partner with the Williamsburg Community Growers, which is a community garden and teaching farm that's located out on Stadium Road, in between War Hill High School and the Whisk complex. That project has been in development for several years now and includes currently 40 community garden plots. All of those are filled. We have a wait list for this spring, so we've had a lot of really great interest from members from all across the area, some from the city of Williamsburg, some James City County. We've had folks come in from York County to participate there, so it's been a really good program. Where we're not only able to offer physical gardening space for those who can't get that space at home, but we also provide educational resources about gardening and conservation in your gardening methods. Our urban programs, we have quite a few, but I'll touch on the two biggest ones here. The first one is the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. This is a statewide program. As of last year, it was funded in the state legislature budget, so it is gaining in popularity, and we're excited that the state chose to fund it last year and again this year as well. Through this program, we can provide both technical and financial assistance for homeowners who are having stormwater issues on their property, and that can include things like flooding, ponding, your backyard fills up every time it rains, and most frequently we're dealing with erosion issues where folks have water moving really quickly across their properties and washing away their driveways or their lawns. So through that program, there's a suite of different best management practices that will determine whether or not those could help address the issues that you're having. And if so, then we can work you through that program to provide a financial reimbursement for the costs incurred in installing those best management practices. So essentially anyone except a government or a locality can apply for that program. So we typically work mostly with homeowners. We have had a few HOAs participate, but churches, schools, any sort of business is also eligible to apply. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges we face in our work at the district, and then also opportunities we see that we think would work really well for the city of Williamsburg. The first one, the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, while it's a great outreach program for homeowners, and we've installed quite a few practices that have made a significant difference to homeowners, it is a financial loss for the district. We receive $500 per completed project through the program. We have about 10% of these site visits that we go on actually result in completed practices, so we are quite frequently losing money on each of those site visits. And while those site visits and working with homeowners and educating them about stormwater, that is all well within our mission and our goal and something that we love to do, we can only do it for so long until we are no longer able to support the staff needed to run that program. So the city of Williamsburg last year was very gracious in providing funding to support that program, so we appreciate that, and we hope to see that again this coming year in fiscal year 2021. But we hope to continue to expand that program as we work through those funding issues. Our second program is called Turf Love, and that is a historic program that was offered in James City County and is up to this point only been offered to James City County residents. As of February of 2019, the district began operating that program, and in our operation, we have opened it up to City of Williamsburg residents, to any resident within our district. But we are hoping to expand that program. And through that program, we work with the James City County Master Gardeners, and they provide site visits to homeowners to talk about lawn care and lawn management and how to manage your lawn in an environmentally sensitive manner. One thing we would like to do with that program is to start working with HOAs more closely, because we know a lot of our HOAs have strict requirements for their homeowners and homeowner lawns, so we'd like to work with them a little bit more closely in the coming year. And then finally, our urban agriculture initiatives. These are more of our education programs with our schools. Through the work at the Williamsburg Community Growers Community Farm, we've had a lot of classes and field trips come out to that site where we can get students out in the garden and teach them about where their food comes from and how to grow and produce their own healthy food. Through that program, we also do a lot of work with the school gardens. I've led after-school clubs at Stonehouse Elementary and Laurel Lane Elementary over the past couple of years. So doing work like that is something we'd like to continue to expand as well. And then finally, this is our contact information. You heard from Dick Phillips earlier, his email there. We have a brand new director from the City of Williamsburg, James Ilias. So that is his email there. Our district manager, Jim Wallace, couldn't be here tonight, but if you need to reach him, that's how you reach him. And then I'm the urban conservationist. You can reach me at that email. And again, I thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Goad.
Sure.
Mr. Phillips, questions from my colleagues?
So no questions, but I really do appreciate you coming. I think in my 10 years now on council, this is our first time seeing you. And so we appreciate it. I think it's very informative to hear what it is that you all do, and better as well. So thank you for your time.
Of course, thanks.
Thank you for being here today, both of you. And I had a couple questions. In terms of to just get an understanding for the folks who may be tuning in today, and also for our information, since we're overlaid with the Chesapeake Bay Act, Clean Water Act, and all that, you guys are not an enforcement agency enforcing those regulations and stipulations on us, right?
That's correct. So all soil and water conservation districts are voluntary. So we don't have any enforcement authority. We don't have any no regulatory authority. We work specifically with folks who are interested in doing more on their land than what is required by the Bay Act.
Right, and it strikes me as incredible because, you mentioned one part of, the organization's name is soil, but if you think about the regions that you serve, there are rural parts of James City County, there are rural parts of New Kent, then you have suburban, I guess this is considered urban. So you get a lot of different soil types, a lot of different nutrients that might be going through. You have different, farming operations impact soils different than what I would do with my yard.
Definitely.
Right. So I think that's also incredible that you guys serve that. And did I hear correctly that you provide incentives for natural and nature-based features for
Yes.
flooding resiliency efforts?
Yeah, through the VCAP program. So some of the BMPs are rain gardens are
Yeah.
really popular, so we can provide financial assistance for folks who install rain gardens on their property. Rainwater harvesting systems, which are your rain barrels that you can connect to your downspouts.
Right.
Permeable pavement is a big one. For folks who live on the shoreline, we can do living shorelines to help protect shorelines from eroding or washing away. So we have a whole suite of different things that we can help pay
That's
on.
great. I would say, maybe 4 years ago, I would have understood any of this, but I've gained a greater appreciation working with the Virginia Coastal Policy Center as a student with William & Mary Law School, and all the things you have said are really critical infrastructures to boost flooding resiliency efforts. I know for the city it doesn't impact us as much, but to your slide about the turf care, I think that definitely is directly applicable to the city residents, and I would strongly encourage every resident to take up that, because we don't really think about all the nutrients that are leaving based on the fertilizers we use or whatever stuff we use to take care of our lawns, and all of that goes into the water system and ultimately impacts or contaminates our water quality. So it's really important. It may not seem that important, but there is nitrogen and phosphorus going into the system, and it's really important, and I think indicative of us all to take a stand and to make sure that we don't go ourselves havoc with all of that. So appreciate your being here, and I hope the members of the public will reach out.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One last comment, if I might. Robin did a very good job of presenting, and that's why we asked her to do it. But we have a staff of people over there that just wanted to mention their names, and because they're young people and doing a good job. Beside the district manager, Jim Wallace, we have our office coordinator, Sheila Jarozeski, who was probably the one that'll answer the phone when you call in. We have Robin, who's an urban conservationist, and we also have Tom Dunlap, who is a conservation specialist is his title, and then we have a conservation technician, Tabitha Zimmerman. So we have a staff of, I think, very capable and knowledgeable young people.
And I hope you guys reach out to the business community.
With all of these practices, many of them are new. The key thing is to see that they're implemented properly and that they're followed through. You mentioned the fertilizers on the lawn. Something that I am interested in and have done a little bit of is actually coming up with alternate plantings of lawns. In other words, a stereotype lawn of Bermuda grass and, a very rich looking. Sometimes there are other grasses, native grasses, that do a far better job and don't require the fertilizing and don't require the other methods. However, they don't always meet the aesthetic requirements laid out by the homeowners association. So that's something we've got to do too, is educate as to why these are good practices and how they're helpful.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere yet? Barbara?
Well, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I was at the NCW Neighborhood Council Williamsburg meeting a year or so ago when you made the presentation and learned a lot then. And I guess I was ahead of my time because I do not have any grass planted in my yard. I use dwarf mondo grass, and it gives the impression of grass without having to be cut or fertilized. So there are a lot of different alternatives out there.
Thank you.
Okay. Just one quick question. You mentioned NACD funds have run out and the district has not secured replacement funding for the Urban Agriculture Initiative. Are you still pursuing other sources? Or?
We are, yes. We actually just submitted another NACD grant, and that's the National Association of Conservation Districts, so this nationwide level agency that oversees conservation districts across the country. So this year we were allowed to apply for a second grant through that same program, so we have submitted that grant. We've also tried to reach out to the WJCC school district to see if we can work in some of our programming to the different needs of classes and schools. So we're looking at other options. We've submitted quite a few smaller grants through your nationwide businesses and industries that provide funding for education. So we're constantly looking for things, but we haven't found that really consistent source of money that we would need to continue that program on in the way that we would like to.
And I don't think the group I'm about to mention likes to get into long-term operational funding, but if you haven't already, it might be worth just talking to someone at the Williamsburg Health Foundation about some bridge funding or something that helps you keep it going until
Certainly.
you find some other sources. So
Yeah.
Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This takes us to our next presentation, which is the activity of Literacy for Life during 2019. We have Joan Peterson, Executive Director, with us. Welcome, Ms. Peterson.
I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I do have a brochure, a folder full of brochures and information that I will leave for each of you. And I'll go through it now so that when you get it, or do you want to hand those out? Yeah, okay. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to tell you what's going on at Literacy for Life. I think many of you have probably heard of Literacy for Life, but you may not realize what Literacy for Life is doing since the last time I checked in here a few years ago. So I'm glad to have the chance to be back and bring you up to date on the amazingly good work that's going on just a little ways from here. For those that don't know, just quickly, Literacy for Life was started by the College of William and Mary in the 70s. Then shortly thereafter was turned into an independent nonprofit. But we continue to have this amazing relationship with the university. They provide us with our space and our housekeeping and, a lot of the infrastructure we need to run the agency. So the beauty of that is it allows us, for the funds we raise, to put it almost all into programming. So what Literacy for Life does basically is reading, writing, math, and English for speakers of other languages, health literacy, and work skills for adults in our community. All our services are free. And the secret sauce to what we do is the hundreds of trained volunteers that provide the instruction to the low literate adults. So it's an amazing organization, and sometimes I don't think people realize that that secret sauce is every bit as advantageous to the community and benefiting them as it is for the learners that we serve. We hear it all the time from our tutors that they get as much out of it as they feel they give, and sometimes more. And it's keeping engaged a lot of the retirees in the community, giving them a reason to get up and give back and help out. So I want to put in the forefront how important it is that the hundreds of volunteers we are helping are equally as benefiting, I believe, as the 850 or so learners that we provide services to each year. Last year it was, I think, 845. The form I'm going to give you shows a smaller number. It says 768, but that doesn't include the 100 or nearly 100 people that we provide GED testing services for. We took that over from the Williamsburg James City County Schools. So we are now providing a service that used to be funded and delivered by the public school system. So I'm very grateful for the support we've gotten from funders for that. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the specific programs that we're doing and some of the exciting work that we've been able to develop around those. One is our Empowering Parents program. That is our most recent endeavor, and that program is now being run at Matthew Whaley and Norge Elementary. And basically what we're doing is taking a lot of the amazing work that we do at the agency and taking those programs on site to the parents of children in the schools. These are ESL parents. So we're going to where the people are. That's kind of the key for us to succeed, is making it as easy as possible to deliver the services to the people who need them most. So partnering with the schools has been wonderful. And we, as part of that program, we do a school success curriculum that we've developed. It helps the parent understand how to navigate the school systems, which is hugely valuable. We also have a program called Mother Read that teaches parents how to read to their children and engage their children in the reading and learning process, which comes naturally to many of us, but for many others not so, depending on their background. And when you have the language barriers, that only makes it more challenging. So that program is also part of it. We do the health literacy program that I'm going to talk about in a moment, our nationally recognized award-winning health literacy program that's called HEAL. And then we also have a program when we go into the schools to let them know about what's available in the community. A lot of people who move here have no idea what resources are available, like Old Town Medical, for instance. So that's our opportunity to raise their awareness and educate them about the services that they can take advantage of, and thereby, potentially give better outcomes for their children and themselves. So that is our Empowering Parents program. Our HEAL program, our health literacy initiative, works with people on understanding how to navigate the healthcare system. As many of you know, that can be extremely difficult for those that were born and raised here, and we have plenty of people we provide that HEAL class to that have been born and raised here, but it's particularly challenging for those who come from elsewhere. In fact, I observed a class once of a group of immigrants, and the instructor asked how many in the class knew what 911 was. There were probably about 15 people. Not one person raised their hand. So it can actually be life-saving. And I always tell people when they raise their eyebrows, if you were dropped in Shanghai tomorrow and had chest pain, would you know what to do? So it's not that surprising if someone's moved here that they may not know about that. But we also teach them how to read medicine bottles. We teach them the questions they should ask when they go to the doctor. We let them know what the pharmacist can do and help them with. Basically, helping them just take care of themselves and their families, building their confidence to allow them to do so. So that HEAL program has been funded in good part 100% locally, actually, by the Williamsburg Health Foundation, so I'm incredibly indebted to them, and always like to give them a shout-out at every opportunity. We continue to develop new classes for that, and we now are able to offer this at around 16 sites, I believe, in Virginia right now, and we serve about 150 people locally here with the help of the Williamsburg Health Foundation. We're also in 5 states now with that program, and we're excited to bring people in from different states to come here to get trained and now bring this back into their community. So that's good for selling hotel rooms, I guess, and it'll hopefully get better with time, although remote trainings are becoming the way of the future. Our Employee Ed program is another initiative that we started in the last couple of years, and that helps people with work skills. So people who may struggle with how to write a resume or how to conduct themselves in an interview, or potentially, if they've come from somewhere else in the world, just understanding what our culture, our work culture is, and a lot of things that go along with that. And I think the best story I can give that kind of illuminates and what that's all about is to give you a specific example of a young man who moved here who was actually waiting tables at one of our local restaurants. He came to us to learn his language. Come to find out, the guy's got an engineering degree in his home country. We basically have a lot of networking going on with businesses in the community. We were, after able to get getting his language skills up to par, place him in a job using his engineering skills, helping an employer, filled a huge void, and at a much greater salary than he was making waiting tables. So there are a lot of immigrants that are probably the lowest hanging fruit to fill some of the jobs that we have in this state. I speak statewide. Some of you may know I was recently appointed by the governor to serve on the Virginia Board of Workforce Development. So really understanding the needs of our community and the needs of the people and how we can do a better job on both sides, helping the businesses and helping the people that need the job. So it's a beautiful thing. I love my job. It's just great. We get to help a lot of people, and it's just a happy place to be. If you have never visited Literacy for Life, I encourage you to come by. We've had people now from the state, and a lot of people just say, well, this is a really happy place. It's just not a typical kind of nonprofit. We are in a really good position where we're getting people into happy places. They're ready to go. We're giving them a hand up. And that's really why it's just such a great place to be, and why you just sense the energy, the positive energy, those of you that know us, and see the staff. We have a staff of about 12 people, but the lion's share of our work is done by the 300 plus volunteers that we train to deliver the services. So those are in a nutshell, and I didn't look at my watch to see how long I've been talking, so I've probably done my 10 minutes, I'm going to guess. So are there any questions for me? But again, thank you for your support and your time today.
Well, thank you for all that you do. I don't have any questions, but I can see that you love your job, and it's got to be a happy place. I think to be able to touch all the lives that you do, to help them with all the ways that you've just demonstrated there in your presentation, I think is it's a quiet activity that happens in the community under the radar a lot of times. And so, but it is a void that needs to be filled, and be able to manage all the volunteers is probably one of the toughest jobs for you. But to have them as a resource, I think, is a testament to the community's desire to want to help those that need this type of help. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Joan, for coming in today, and I know that wrangling with your board members is certainly not your top priority, because we all support you very much. So that's one challenge you don't have to deal with, unlike other organizations. But I think speaking to the mission of Literacy for Life, it's incredibly important, but also personal to me. You know, my parents were immigrants to this country and would have benefited from a program like Literacy for Life. So from the economic mobility standpoint, from a public health standpoint, again, I feel like it's a recurring theme today, it plays a vital role in enhancing our Greater Williamsburg area. So I thank you for all you've done, and also for our volunteers, and for those excellent board members who serve on your board. Thank you.
You're welcome. And just interestingly, 1 in 6 Americans in the workplace are immigrants. So it is a huge population and one that we can help kind of move up the ranks, which helps everybody.
And I just want to thank you also for the presentation. I've been to the luncheons of a few of the...
Ms. Peterson, are you possibly leaning on the little remote? Sorry, it was making the presentation for us.
Serious presentation.
Sorry about that.
So I was just going to say, I've been to the luncheons a few times, and you really get a chance to interact not only with the volunteers, but also those who are benefiting from the services, and have seen over the years how the expansion has occurred to different areas, and so it's very gratifying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. It's true, though, that you could be a volunteer and not be a great dancer, right?
That's true. It's not a prerequisite, although it's a plus.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And just, if I could just add, I think with the 3 presentations we've seen so far today, they're all examples of wonderful work that happens within this community by dedicated people that many of the people who live here don't have much knowledge that it's going on. And so we congratulate you for all the good that you accomplish and for working to better the lives of so many other people within our community. And we just hope more people will get involved. And one other thing I'd like to note is William and Mary's participation. I think William and Mary often doesn't get recognized for the tremendous impact the university has on the entire community through volunteer efforts of the students, through what the faculty contribute, and supporting great organizations like yours. And if somebody wanted to come to your happy workplace, they would go to the School of Education.
We're in the School of Ed, and we always need tutors. We typically have a wait list of 35 to 50 people at any time. So anybody who's listening, who has a good command of the English language and wants to come out to a happy place, we need the help. And we're also looking for partnerships with businesses to help place our learners when we get their skills up. So there's lots of opportunities to partner with Literacy for Life, and we are eager to work with people.
Great. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This takes us to our 4th presentation today, some of which we just saw flash by us very quickly. And this is a quarterly report from the Greater Williamsburg Business Council, Ms. Terry Banez, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome.
Mayor Freiling, Mr. Trivette, and city council members, thanks for having me here. You got my speed presentation really quick there for a second. Oh.
We might have to.
Okay. Here, keep going. Okay, I got you. Yeah. Here I am. Okay. Oh, okay. That was, okay. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our sponsors, which you are one, to say thank you so much for your sponsorship. We couldn't do it without you. And I have a big one for you to say thank you very much for your support. We greatly, greatly appreciate it at the Business Council. So I'm here to speak from the Greater Williamsburg Chamber and Tourism Alliance, and our side is the Business Council, and we represent and support the businesses throughout the community. And I want to also share with you how much the Business Council ties in with the Tourism Council, because without a strong tourism base, we wouldn't have a strong business base. So where have we been since I've last seen you? I want to talk about some of our metrics and our funding. I want to be very transparent, and I know that you'll have some questions for me. So membership, this is through the end of November. And I always kind of do kind of red light, green light. What can we do better? What do we need to stop? So on new members, we are up 52% from last year, which is just a number I'm very proud of my team for. We have a new membership manager, Courtney Driscoll. But if you look at it this year, we have 137 new members. That is phenomenal. These numbers just don't happen. It's taken us a lot to get here. We really listened to the community, made changes, and listened to what people were looking for. And I'll give you some examples of that as we go. Last year, just in comparison, I think it's always important, last year for the same time, 90 new members. So we're up 52%. And if you look at the trend for all of 2008, we were down 9% in membership. So 2018, I'm sorry. And then renewals, I think this, I'm definitely giving us a green light on this. We're doing better than last year. So last year it trended down 12%. This year we're down 8.6%. So we always measure these as well because you want to make sure that you're keeping your businesses. And some of this is attrition, and some businesses close. Some people open for a year because they want us to cut the ribbon for them. So there are reasons. And also we have a rolling membership. So if we had a big renewal that there is one right now that I know. So if they would have paid their renewal, then we would almost been flat for the year. For the year, we were trending about 3% down. So this is an area we're looking at this year very hard. And then our annual sponsorships, again, all credit goes to the team. Next door, this year we're at 69,000 versus last year at 49,000. And a huge shout out to Courtney Driscoll with membership, and really it's a group effort because the events support the members, Carter supports the social media, but we had a record month in October, which 18 brand new members to the Business Council. This is our Business Council funding. No one has ever shown this to you. And it's actually where we, how we do our breakdown on our funding. So the biggest chunk, I did it in a pie chart so you could see it. 331,000 comes out of membership. That's membership and sponsorship. The municipal support, 101 comes from each 3 of the municipalities. Our events are another 96,000, and then miscellaneous is 15,000 for a total budget of 744,000. And I do want to give a shout out because we've taken over the GWP. That is not in this budget because it's a wash. 150 comes in, and we expect 150 to go out. And then there's always questions about our org chart. How many people do you have next door? So we have 5 full-time employees. Beth Zambella, or let's do by position. The finance director was a shared position, but moving forward, it is not a shared position. It's a full-time business council position. And then we have Vicki Noel, who is our executive assistant. They help not only me, but they help the Greater Williamsburg Partnership. So that is a new position that was created this year, but it's not a new position in headcount. We lost our director of membership, so we replaced them with the administrative support, at actually a lower rate. So, and then there's 2 shared positions. Our front, Naomi, who I know you'll all know, who is at the front desk, is a shared position, and right now we have an open position for a part-time receptionist. And I think this is really important. I did this for another presentation. I think it's really interesting. So if you look at how do chambers of commerce, and we'll call them chambers because in nationally they call them chambers, not business councils. So how do they really support tourism? Is it important to have one, and do they hold hands, and are they collaborative? So if you look at it, travel and tourism nationally accounts for $888 billion in revenues and 7.9 million in jobs. So that's a big thing. So I think it's really important to know. So, and you have this in your presentation, so I won't go over it word for word, but it's so important that we have a legislative point of view. We have a lobbyist that goes to Richmond. His name is Ira Agricola, who supports us. And that really is to encourage bipartisan legislation to promote tourism and business prosperity. Collaboration, young professionals. We have the leader of our Aspire, our young professional group here, Yuri, and I'll talk more about that in the future. But that's really to keep our people that are here, that are graduating from William and Mary. I've got kids that live in Williamsburg that can't live here because they're finding more solid jobs elsewhere. So we are really working hard to keep our young professionals here. I want to share a story real quick about a young professional who opened Column 15. It's a coffee shop over in James York Plaza. This is when the collaboration works well. She got sent to me by a city council member, and I gave that away, Barb, sorry, it was not you, it was a man, and got sent to me, and she said, I graduated from William & Mary, I want to stay in the area, and I have this great idea to open a coffee shop, and everybody's been helpful, but how do I get the word out? How do I make my business successful? So it's really starting to percolate. It's working like it's supposed to, where the whole community is working together in one group. Destination management, I think it's important to remember, if we're not a strong destination, if our businesses aren't good, if they're not growing, like we have the Edge over in James York Plaza, we have lots of exciting things going on here in the city, people want to come, and that's us helping the businesses get stronger and be successful so that they will come here. Diversification, I can't just talk about this enough. If we don't have diverse businesses and attractions, it hurts all of us. And so our job, like whoever thought we would have Axe Republic, where you could go throw axes in Williamsburg, I think that's pretty diverse. And then transportation, again, we promote that, and we have relationships, and it helps the workforce. I can talk about that, but I know I'm preaching to the choir here. And then just with this, I would say also workforce development is so important, because we can help fill those tourism jobs and help bring in other jobs that are higher level. Something that we're doing different next door that we haven't done before is I have become very involved in these partnerships, collaboration. Virginia Chamber, for the first time ever, in February, we are hosting a roundtable right next door here in Williamsburg, that Virginia Chamber executives can come learn about membership and the success we're having and what we're doing, so they can take it out throughout the rest of the state. So I want to make sure that we're talking about all the good things we're doing here in Williamsburg, sharing it, and also learning from them what we can bring here. For the first time ever, we are now a V3 certified chamber, which means we are focused on veterans and how we can really get more jobs for them, how they can become more active in our businesses. And there's 30,000 veterans in this area that we can help. So we're really excited about that. I'm a member on the board for Greater Peninsula Workforce. I think that's important. The Hampton Roads, it's called Harumpha, which makes me think of Dr. Seuss. But I've already been to the Pentagon with them, and they're doing some really neat things, and we're hearing about the 750 new people are going to come to this area for some new jobs that are coming to NASA, and that's more things that will help our businesses and that we can get to those people as they move into the area. And then, of course, the mega region. So Greater Williamsburg Partnership, I know you know a lot about this, but for those who don't, if I could just touch base real quick on that. We hired Vaughn Gilbert October 9th. She comes from Chesapeake with over 20 years of economic development. She is absolutely terrific. And on her LinkedIn profile, she put that she put her press release, and she had 13,000 views. And this was from a slide from before. So I thought I should do that and see how many views she gets on mine, because I have a lot of LinkedIn, and I only got 500 views. So I think it shows her engagement at the state level and regionally and nationally, and lots of comments. And she's already met with done tours of Williamsburg, met with you. And she's excited about what she's going to bring to the table. Very active in the state as well. And I won't do these, but what is Greater Williamsburg Partnership? It adds another piece to the Business Council about bringing new business, retention, industry diversification, and bringing higher wage jobs to the area. So that we're really excited to have the Greater Williamsburg Partnership with us. And if you haven't had a chance to meet her, please stop by or reach out to her, and she would love to tell you what she's doing. So events. I think it's important to note, or it is important to note, that we have events. We just had one that's not only important for the businesses, it's important for our community. That's why the Business Council is so important. It's important for our community, such as the pre-legislative forum. We had not our candidates, we had our senators and our delegates there to talk about issues that are very important to the citizens and the businesses of Williamsburg. We have other events throughout the year that bring in overnight guests, and I think sometimes we forget that because we've always done them, but we're really shaking it up next door. So these are our new events that we had for 2019. We had a new signature event, 15 Under 50, that was very well attended. So we honored the best 15 under 50 candidates, and that made a difference to the community, made a difference to the businesses. And you know what? We had so many great candidates, and then when it was finished, we had people say, how can we get involved next year? So we know this is a win for the community, so we'll keep that going. And then, like I said, we really listened to you when we went out to the community leaders and we said, what do we need to do better? What can we do? Is we said that people said, give us some meat. We want to know more about regional issues. We want to know how we can impact our business, what's happening out there. So we have a Spotlight Speaker Series now. It's every quarter. The next one will be Barry Duvall, and then we have Stephen Moray. So we have a lot of people coming in, so we're adding more heavy lifting, I would say. Tables of 8 Women Business Networking. I know that y'all have heard of these, very successful. On a small basis, you get 8 women in a group. They get to talk for an hour, and they talk about business. And it was so successful that for 2020, I'll give you a preview, a sneak peek of a preview. The men said they want to have business and brews. So if you watch out now, we're going to have brewery meetings for men to a very small networking event. So we're excited about that. And also, we do it during downtimes, so it drives business to our restaurants. So you'll see one in the fall, so it has a 2-part edge to that. We had a women's health forum. We added new member orientation because I know that y'all say this, what, they sign up and then they go, well, we don't really know what to do. How can we get the best, like I gave the example of Victoria from column 15. She goes, I don't know how to use the membership. How can I best get where more people will come to my business? So we have new member orientation. Old people can come, new people can come, and that's on a monthly basis. Aspire, again, Yuri has done a fabulous job. They have a lot of events that we hear from our membership that say they did a LinkedIn event that you could change your profile, how to update your LinkedIn, and people that were out of her age group said, how come you can't do this for us? So they're really a driving force about bringing new and creative things in, and then our Google workshop. And I just wanted to give you the highlights of that pretty picture. Some people in this room are in there, and so we had some winners. And Aspire, just a shout out to Yuri, and that they're doing a lot of good work, and they continue to grow in membership. And they are one of the self-supporting businesses. They have a neat model that they volunteer and put the money back into the chamber, so they're able to do some really neat events for their members. And then our first Business Spotlight series had Craig Quigley, and if you know him, he is the retired admiral who talked about what the military means to this area, and we had 73 people attend, which was phenomenal for a first-time event. I just wanted to do a shout out, Power of Women event. Dr. Catherine Rowe will be out at Kings Mill. This is all for everybody. It's open to the public, not women only. The women did want this as an only event. They kind of gave in because they said that men have wives and grandchildren and daughters, so everybody can come learn about the power of women. And another sneak preview is the Girl Scouts are going to do the honor guard, and they are also releasing their new cookie that day. So you'll get to hear that out there. And then we have Chamber Day at the Capitol, which is we go up, you get to meet with your legislators. We have a tour of the Capitol, and it's an important event. We hope that you can join us. We have a bus that's leaving from here. And just real quick, Carter Johnson, which I'm sure you know, continues to grow all of our social media following. And he competes against himself to see how many views he'll get. And we have almost, his goal was 1,000 new likes. This is through November, so he has about 43 new people that he needs to get as friends on Facebook. And I would just want to show you the reach. So when we had 15 under 50, that first post reached 1,789 people, 710 engagements. That's a lot, y'all, for a small town, so I'm very proud of that. And then the Oktoberfest, we tried a couple new things this year, made it a very successful event. Almost 1,900 people reached that post. So that's people learning and talking about Williamsburg. And then Revolutionary Golf with Jackie. So thank you all for your support, and I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Banez. Come to my colleagues.
Ms. Banez, thank you for being here. It's always a
course.
pleasure to see you, and appreciate all the work that you're doing now at the Business Council. And as I listen to you, I take great pride that we've been able to, through all the transitions over the last 2 years, been able to get your organization laser focused on what it is that you do, and now bringing Vaughn in with the GWP, I think is really going to be helpful to creating, a brand of this organization. To that, I know how we got to calling it the Business Council. I just wonder if we should continue to do that. When I talk to people and I mention the name chamber and I go, it's a business council. And they go, what's a business council? And so I just wonder if that's something that could be revisited. I think we ought to call ourselves the Chamber of Commerce of Williamsburg. I think from a branding position, the connection to other chambers, it just makes better sense. And so I don't know how to do that, but.
Yeah, I think, and Doug, I probably share your, it's probably not a popular thing for me to share. When I came, for y'all to know, we had the Alliance, and we had a Tourism Council and a Business Council, so they complement each other. And I do agree with you. We say Business Council, and then we say, that really means chamber.
Right.
So, no, I'll take it to the board and see. I think that's a good idea.
I think it just help prospective members understand better what it is that you're doing, and just takes all that question out of the whole conversation, and you get right to business. But looking at all the events, the 1550, I complimented you and I meant it. I think that was a great branding event for the chamber. Obviously it brought awareness to you, and it got built enthusiasm, and people were participating, and that's exactly the type of stuff that we need from our Chamber of Commerce to get our business community involved, so that they can take advantage of not just that event, but other things, seminars, and the speaking folks that you got coming in, and just in terms of business education. You offer a lot, and I really hope that we can get more members into the organization.
You want me to beat 53%?
I do. 2,000 members, that's my goal.
That's right, but thank you. I appreciate that. And you've been a good supporter to be out at the events, and we appreciate that as well, so thank you.
I'll see you at the next board meeting when you bring that up. Thank you, Tara, for being here today and for providing this update. Just to recap from what I understood before I came to town, the criticism I've heard or critique was that typically the same people will come to Olde events in the chamber, and there's not really much growth there. Then you fast forward to the whole the impact of SB 942, putting the two distinct branches of the Tourism Council and Business Council. Some folks were throwing their hands up in the air saying, who knows what the chamber will become? Is it going to become irrelevant? Are we going to fold? And all of those fears have been proven unfounded. And it's in large part due to your leadership in making that such a thriving organization. I mean, just the memberships alone, some of the events, the few events that I've been able to make too, I've seen new faces that I've never seen before that, previous directors have perhaps struggled with. And I appreciate your aggressive outreach. And in fact, someone had William Mary, anonymous student, had just texted me following this meeting live saying that the Lincoln event was awesome. And these things just have practical impacts. These are things that small businesses, large businesses, mid-sized businesses, Doug's businesses want to engage in. One thing that I do want you to start thinking a little bit more on, and I know this is starting to become an emerging trend with some chambers across the country. I know community foundations here in the Hampton Roads have made it a big part of their monthly newsletter. But finding more of a focus with minority-owned and women-owned businesses. I mean, do we even know what the inventory is? Based on your membership alone, how many of those are women-owned or minority-owned? And it's not to single them out. There are a lot of different incentives that are offered by the state, like SWAM certification. V3 for veterans has a component with minority-owned and women-owned businesses. I'd like to get the ball rolling, at least venture out a question or a challenge to you to find ways to interact with our local people of color-owned businesses. I mean, Corey Bartlett, I mean, that guy works a lot.
Agree.
And he works hard, and those are just experiences, whether it's distinct experiences or parallel experiences with others. I think it's worth venturing a little bit more. There are studies done that there are economic mobility, economic barriers, social barriers to entry, and we would love to have a chamber that's inclusive, and I'm sure you share those values too. And you're doing an incredible work with your programming and your social media, so keep up the good work, and thanks for hearing out my 2 cents, and I'll see you at the next board meeting when I bring that one
No,
up too.
I appreciate that. The one thing I'll say, you said it very nicely. My team says you dump the events up on their head. So I think it's important that if you haven't been to an event, come out to an event because they're new, they're interactive. We're trying some new places. And we've had great success with all of the women's event, and you'll see that we're adding minority, we're adding Hispanic, we're adding Black, we're adding more to that. So you'll see that in the demographic, not only of our board, but in our committees as well. So thank you for that feedback.
And I would just like to reiterate what my colleagues have said and applaud your leadership in developing so many programs, both innovative and rewarding. I participated in a couple of the Tables for Eight, and I thought that was a great event. And sorry I'll miss the Power of Women event, but know that there will be additional ones in the future.
Thank you. And can I just say the Power of Women's event with Dr. Rowe is Councilwoman Ramsey's idea that we met when I first came on board, and she said, wouldn't it be a neat thing to be able to do this for women? So thank you for that. This is coming true because of our conversation a long time ago. And I think, again, that shows the collaboration and the willingness to listen. And so thank you very much for that.
Well, thanks, Terry, for your presentation. The Chamber was the first organization I joined when I moved back to Williamsburg several years ago. I was able to jump into the Community Leadership Service program, which was great. And ironically, I was the only city member for the class of 2016. And I think in Barb's class, you had 3 members. So the trend is upward, and I think the next class will exceed that, hopefully. But that was a great program, which alternates years with a lead program, which is also great. And I enjoyed serving on the Health Committee, which is great. And I've been able to invite William & Mary pre-med students to those committees. So it gives them an opportunity to see what, Williamsburg health organizations do, in terms of bringing the community together. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you for serving on the Health Committee and being so active in our events. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Banez. We very much appreciate the update and all the good work that you and your team are doing.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This takes us to our last presentation today, which is presentation, discussion, and direction to staff concerning a mural and public art program. Mr. Trivette?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The first test is trying to find it. Oh, there. Oh, good. I was worried for no reason. So today we wanted to talk about a GIO that the City Council set for us, and that is to develop a mural art, public art program. As we go through this presentation, you're going to see that we set out with the mission of talking about murals explicitly, and at some point it became clear to me that those two things, mural art program versus a public art program, in most localities are synonymous, and really doesn't make a lot of sense to split them up because the same processes would be used for both. So as we go through this, you'll see how the process sort of intertwines, and at the end, the recommendation will be for a public art program, not specifically for murals. Although all of my pretty pictures are mural related, I will warn you in advance. So the first thing that we want to talk about is probably the most difficult portion of talking about art generally, and that is defining what you're talking about. And this is a critical question, particularly for murals, because it's so public. And when you think about murals, obviously you think about the side of a building, much like that one in the first picture there with the gray wall, and what to paint on it. And as you can see from the 4 definitions that I chose to put in the presentation today, there's a lot of difference, even amongst localities. I've included 3 definitions from localities and 1 straight from the Oxford Dictionary, and I just wanted to talk about them briefly. Number 1 is an example from Hampton. And it's a pretty straightforward definition, but you can see it includes a direct prohibition of commercial advertising. And so that's a key distinction among typical definitions in localities that are regulating mural art or art in general. And then the next definition comes from the Oxford Dictionary, again, pretty straightforward. Number 3 is from Portland, and it, again, is a very straightforward definition with just a little bit more context in that it talks about the fact that they're hand-produced and the types of materials that can be used and how they're hung on the building. And then the 4th definition is from Los Angeles. And I put this one in here because I think it's important to talk about the differences between the definitions and the types of difficulties they can present. And that'll bring us to the pictures that I've also included. So in the Los Angeles definition, you see the standard community regulation against commercial messages, but you also have the distinct difference of digitally painted images. And what was interesting as I did the research on this was the fact that when Los Angeles rolled this definition out and redefined their mural art program, their artisan community really came out in force objecting to this definition because of that digitally printed images wording. And they said, basically, you're changing the medium of our entire outlet, and we really don't think that's appropriate. You need to rethink this. Ultimately, the city did not and is still included in their definition and program. I wanted to talk about the 3 pictures because I think they illustrate some of the more common problems with regulating art, particularly murals, as it relates to free speech. So in the Charlottesville example there, you can see I've got a picture of what you would sort of conjure up as a building in need of something, a very flat gray wall that faces a parking lot. And then the bottom picture is something that they did to spruce it up. So the owner of that building and business asked a local school to come up with some design concepts and then paint the mural. And the local school did and decided on like an Andy Warhol type of theme, which resulted in 4 camera pictures, all of different colors, very vibrant. And they really didn't think much of it. So they painted the mural, and the city said, wait a second, time out, it's advertising, because the business in that building is a camera shop. And so, you know, you can see there that the line between advertising and art is very, very thin. In the next example, the one from Winchester, is a similar but different problem. So this is a picture of a Mexican restaurant and the mural in progress. And as you can see there, the mural that's being painted is sort of a landscape scene from Mexico. And you think, you know where I'm going here, right? That it's advertising, but no, that wasn't the problem. In this case, the city of Winchester said, you've got more than 4 colors, which is a violation of the ARB rules in that district. So that's something certainly that we can relate to, but not the problem of advertising, but still a regulatory issue. And then in Arlington, and this example is a little bit different, I'm going to come back to why when we get to the end of this. In Arlington, you have a very recent example of the commercial prohibition and the problem with regulating it. In this instance, the owner of that building commissioned a traveling artisan group, I didn't know there was such a thing, but apparently there is, to paint a mural on the side of this building. And I hope you can sort of see that the 3D relief of that, as the building has an arch sort of gateway that connects it to another structure, and the art sort of flows across that. And that's the smoke that's coming out of what now is a blue well. But when this was originally painted, that was a cigar. And the problem was, in Arlington, they have the commercial prohibition, and that building is a smoke shop. And so they said, oh, it's commercial advertising. Even though there's no branding at all in that original cigar picture, you can find it on the internet if you're interested. And so the solution was to change the cigar to a blue whale. You know, I guess to everyone, art is different. Now, Arlington is a good example to talk about because they sort of led the way, at least on the East Coast, for regulating commercial advertising. And I told the story in some of the briefings this morning. The first and best example of this was a company called Wag the Dog, which was a dog, I think a dog grooming or dog supply store that faced a dog park in Arlington. And the owner had this very large brick wall and decided to paint a mural on it that faced the dog park. And so she did so and included, it was a scene of a bunch of dogs sort of frolicking in a park, not unlike the one that they faced. And the issue that the city took was that the dogs in question were the same dogs on her logo, little cartoon dog figures. And so she actually fought that decision all the way to Supreme Court and ultimately lost. And the court said, and every court that the challenge appeared before said, no, this is advertising because that's clearly the dog from your own advertising. Now, it didn't help that in her deposition, she acknowledged that it was actually advertising. But ultimately, it was stricken down. Now, in the examples I've shown you here, Charlottesville and Winchester, the difference between Arlington and those two examples is Charlottesville and Winchester actually went back, changed the regulations to make this allowed. So the community outcry was enough, and they decided, that line between commercial advertising and what is art in our community is so thin, we really have no business deciding that. It's really about deciding what the art is. And so that's why I personally am drawn to the definition in number 3 from Portland. In fact, that definition has been held up by a couple of different law firms that specialize in free speech related to commercial advertising as what should be the model ordinance for regulating mural art. And the reason is because it is fairly generic, but still given the specificity of what a mural is, and sort of allows the process to determine what appropriate art might be. So as we move on, this slide's got a video, I'll warn you in advance, and it should start playing. There's a little bit of music. There we go. For dramatic effect, maybe, as I talk. The mural that's being painted there in the video is the first example, and that is from Stanton, Virginia, who released an RFP recently to paint a mural on the side of that building. And they had some very specific qualifications. It needed to be very Stanton-esque and welcoming to anybody that might come to the city. My personal opinion is I think they achieved the mission. They did this using a grant through the 50 Years of Love program, which you can sort of see a reference to there at the bottom right, that was offered by the Virginia Tourism Corporation. And so it was a $10,000 grant, and the city of Stanton translated that into a $7,000 artist commission, and the remainder of that money paid for the city's cost in providing the incentive to do the mural. The next data point there is it took them 2 times of issuing the RFP to get the mix right between the artist commission and the benefits that were being provided by the city to make this art profitable. And one of the things that we frequently forget in public art is there is an artist involved, and this is how they make their living. And so it can't just be a donation every time to the locality where they're building it or putting it in, even though it's promoting their own artwork. So in this example, 2 times to get it right, and ultimately they selected a mural artist from the city of Charlottesville to come in and paint the You Belong Here City of Stanton mural. I think it's interesting that in both the examples I'm going to talk about, Stanton and Hampton, these are privately owned buildings that the city then did the procurement of the artist and regulated the artwork and provided a grant to install the art. But obviously, as you can see there, the finished Stanton mural, I think really certainly improved the side of that building that faced a road in their historic downtown. And then the last data point, or there are 2 more, I guess, 112 days from start to finish in the RFP. It did take them a little bit longer than that. And then how they split up the artist commission. So they paid 25% upon hire and 75% on delivery. And then the last little square there dealing with Stanton is an excerpt from their ARB guidelines. And I put a lot of ARB related stuff in this presentation because I think that one of the things that we frequently worry about is aesthetics and how this will affect the aesthetics of Williamsburg. And I don't think anybody denies that the aesthetics of Williamsburg are sort of a core principle to what we do and what makes us unique and attractive. And I just want to point out that a lot of historic communities manage this relationship fairly effectively, even when they have ARBs doing a lot of that heavy lifting. And so this is an example. The city of Stanton, when they issued the RFP, realized they didn't have a process for approving such an artwork. And so they went back, looked at their ARB guidelines, and decided on this section, which provides for the ARB to issue what's called a certificate of appropriateness. As I did my research, what I found is a lot of communities do this process of a certificate of appropriateness, particularly for public art. So any type of public art, whether it be a statue, a painting, or what have you, might go through that process where the ARB is not looking at the art, determining whether or not the art's appropriate, but whether or not the location is appropriate for the art. And I know it's hard to put your arms around that, but if you think about if that particular artwork in this mural in Stanton were applied to a different building, it could detract from the architectural features of the historic neighborhood. And that's where the ARB would say, this is not the appropriate location. So again, distinction between the art's content and whether or not it's appropriate for the building and the neighborhood.
Why don't they call it a certificate of location?
Right.
Appropriateness is a really bad term.
I agree. I actually had to look it up to see if it was really a word. But
It's a legal thing. It's a legal term.
Hampton RFP, they did a very similar process, but for 2 buildings in their downtown, each one with a $10,000 commission. One of those pieces is done. I'm not sure about the second one. I couldn't find pictures of it, so I'm not sure that it is done. It's a fairly recent process for them. And then 124 days for completion. The major distinction there is they paid in a third to those artists involved. Again, privately owned buildings where the city was asked, or the Downtown Development Association in the case of Hampton, to run the selection process and determine the art's appropriateness. Now I'm using the word. So then here's a look at mural processes. So if we were going to define a public art process, we start by looking at what other places have done, and we're fortunate in that a lot of localities, even in Virginia, have very robust public art programs. And this is sort of the steps that they follow generally. So in this case, there's a public art application that's made to an art liaison, which is a city staff position. Typically, it's someone already on the staff, either in Parks and Recreation or in Economic Development or in the city manager's office, that receives these applications and then processes them. In terms of processing, they go to then an arts council or an arts commission who would review the art itself and determine whether or not it's acceptable. Very often that's done through an RFP process or a juried process where the art is solicited and that arts council is actually deciding what the art should be based on some parameters that are set by, the private property owner or the person desiring the art. From there, it goes to the Architectural Review Board, who would determine, is it appropriate for the location that's been selected? And then, as the case may be, a site plan review by the Planning Commission. And it's important to note that more and more frequently, public art is coming to us in the form of an application feature for new development. And I think the reason for that is because developers are recognizing that people more and more are drawn to places that have a distinct aesthetic value. And so they are putting more and more impetus on the design itself. And we've seen that actually recently here with Midtown Row, who from the initial application right through to approval indicated their interest in having a mural on one or more of their buildings that they're constructing. So again, site plan review process would bring the PC into that. And then at the bottom of the slide, I've included a couple different documents. The first one is the City of Charlottesville, a segment out of their ARB design guidelines. There are 14 criteria there where they regulate how the ARB should look at location question of public art that's applied for. In the middle, there is the implementation plan for the City of Alexandria, and then an excerpt out of Arlington's implementation plan for public art. And I wanted to put these in here because I wanted to illustrate that a lot of localities over the years, recent years, have hired consultants to develop programs and processes. And as I looked at their plans, I really took away the 2 most important factors of the work that was done by the consultants in question was to ask the community, what type of art are you interested in? And where would you put it? And that's the second picture. That sort of drawing with the lines on it is from a design charrette where the community was sitting around the Arlington table and saying, these would be good locations for public art. And those are the 2 steps I think that represent the most value from hiring those consultants. I would argue that at this point, we don't need to hire a consultant to do this work for us. I think we can follow the already proven examples. And that's the last picture, which is the action plan from the City of Roanoke's public art plan. It was done in 2006 and included sort of step by step. You should do this, 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 and this immediately, and then here are some follow-up steps. So I'm just illustrating that I think we can come up with a plan and a process ourselves without engaging a consultant. So then the staff recommendations, and I think out of this presentation, this is probably one of my favorite examples of mural art because I want to point out the subtlety here of the 2 children talking by a can, right? We're using a string. And what they did was they used the landscape because you can see the utility line that runs between the 2 buildings actually connects them.
I think those are actually unrecyclable yogurt.
Well, there you go. Reuse, that's it. So I like this slide for that reason. But the staff recommendation is pretty straightforward. What we're recognizing here is that art and tourism are linked together. And certainly in our case, our tourism development specialist, Joanna, is the best person to be our art liaison. She's already managing a cyclical grant program. She works with the board and a commission. She's already dealing with the Williamsburg Area Arts Commission. And she told me earlier today she's very excited about this. I don't know that she could have come up with another response, but we'll say that she's very excited. And then the next thing is we need to develop an application. I think that goes without saying, where people could apply for public art, remembering that we're talking a lot about murals today. But as we've gone through recent years, we know we've added a great deal of public art in the form of statuary, and we don't have a good process for A, approving it, B, deciding what it should be, and thirdly, deciding where it should go. And I think it's time that we address that in a more formal process. So the formal process starts with defining an arts council. We need a new body appointed by the city council that would be the jurors of the art. And that would include both looking at location and the content. And then we need to decide on that review process. In this case, the city staff, we've talked about it a little bit, and what we thought was including more was better than not, and so we made a fairly complex process for review. And that would start with the application to the art liaison, in this case Joanna in the Economic Development Department, and then it would from there go to the Arts Council, who would review whether or not what's being asked for is appropriate for the city.
This says Arts Commission.
Does it say commission? Yeah, we updated it. On the slide it says council. Okay. So what we did is that council would have the option, based on what the person applying desires, to go through the RFP process, do a juried art program, and select the art themselves, or react to what someone has already requested. One of the key differences here that I talked about with the staff is, if you're a private building owner and you've got this great wall to do public art on, I'm going to stick with murals because it's the easiest example, and you've got a friend who does art, and you want them to paint the wall for you, and you know what you want, you know the design. That's fine. That's great. Apply. Let us review it. If it gets approved, you can go forth. If you want public funding, you should choose the public process, where you say, hey, I've got this great building. I'd like to do a mural on the side of it. I would like the city's assistance from funding perspective, and I'm going to allow the city in return to go through the juried process, do the RFP, and have greater control over the ultimate content. I think that's a fair trade. Back to the process, the Arts Council then would turn it over to the ARB for review, and then to the Planning Commission, and final approval by the City Council. We're going to talk about in a minute some unanswered questions, and that process is one of those, because I do think you could streamline that down a little bit by who you put on your Arts Council, and that's something we'd like you all to give us some feedback on. The next step is data collection. This would be a step where our arts liaison would go out and do some of that study work that was done in the other localities to determine what type of art and best locations. We think we can do that ourselves using standard survey equipment and publicinput.com, which the city already has, to gather that data. And then the last thing is maybe the most important, because the key component of successful public art programs, whether they're arts in public places or an independent program run by the city, is funding, guaranteed funding. And so as a community and as a council, we need to start talking about what that funding model looks like for us. Very often in localities who have successful public art programs, that's referred to as a percent for the arts. And that 1% is derived through various calculations. In our case, I'm recommending that we consider a 1% equal to the city's annual CIP amount, which every year could be a considerable amount of money. Now, this is a soft commitment, because what you're saying is our priority is to create 1% for public art, and in great years, we'll be able to do that. In lean years, I will be recommending that we dial that back. The advantage is, in the good years, the 1% of our total CIP is significant. In fact, for this year, I think I calculated $165,000 based on the total value of about $16.5 million. That's a big number, and certainly in a lot of years we wouldn't spend it, but I think that there is an appetite in this community for some big projects, not just the smaller projects that we've been doing. And in order to do those, you're going to need a cache of money to draw from. And in the lean years, it gives us the ability to scale back what we commit to this program without damaging its success. And so I just want you to start thinking about funding as we move into the drafting of a policy. So then the unanswered questions, as promised, the first one is allowed locations. There are two ways to do this, particularly as we think about murals. there are areas of the city that are appropriate for murals, and there are areas of the city that are not appropriate for murals. And probably if we surveyed the council and the staff, we would have difference of opinion on where those areas are. So there is a question about, do we say that there's an overlay district for public art or murals, and it only applies to Midtown, which would include the Arts District, or not? And if you don't do sort of that designated areas, how would that work? It would be defined by the process. So I, as a property owner, anywhere in the city, could apply for the ability to put in public art. It would just have to go through the process that we've defined, whether that includes the Planning Commission, the City Council, and that process would ferret out whether or not the location is a good idea. The next one is Public Arts Council. We need to put some thought into what that is, who's on it, do we engage an existing local arts group to help us sort of backstaff that and put some structure to it initially, or do we start from scratch? And then process. That series of steps that I outlined, starting with the application to our arts liaison through to the ARB, the Planning Commission, and ultimately the City Council. Do you like that complexity? Do you want all those people to have hands-on with every single application? Or would you rather take that process and truncate it by taking a person from the Planning Commission, a person from the ARB, and putting them on the Arts Council that sort of expedites the review process? In which case, you could probably eliminate the steps of the Planning Commission, maybe even the City Council's review, if there were City Council representation on the Arts Council. And then the last one is advertising limits. You know, I talked a lot about this as we did the briefings on this item. To me, this should be an easy one, just because advertising and the boundary between art and what is advertising is so thin. I would be a proponent that we not get involved in it, that we use the more generic language that we found in Portland as the definition, and allow our process to determine, is the art, regardless of content, appropriate or not? And let those people assigned determine, is it advertising or is it not advertising, based on the content. One of the things that troubles me about that sort of hard prohibition is that if you think about mural art, particularly in the older industrial communities like Danville, where our fire chief came from, you've got a lot of good examples of those old buildings with painted murals, they're considered now, that are actually Coca-Cola advertisements or Esso gas station advertisements. And now the ARBs in those historic localities would be fiercely protective of those so that they're not only maintained but restored. And so those are originally advertising. So I think that for us to exclude that sort of limits the content of what might be considered in our art program. So those are the unanswered questions I'd like you to be pondering as we move through the drafting of the proposal. As you'll notice, this sort of follows the exact same process of bringing to you the background, but not necessarily the completed program content that we used for our micromobility program. I don't know that we will have this ready for you next month like we did with the scooters, but it's possible. It's very likely it takes us a couple of months to put this together. And so if you can sort of be pondering these four key issues and let me know how you feel, it'll make it a lot easier for us to draft all the necessary changes that have to be put in place to make this a reality. As I was talking to the city attorney, one of the things I think it's important to point out is that we can draft a policy and a process for how we're going to handle applications, putting the funding in place of the 1%, and putting in guidelines for the ARB to consider are going to take longer. So while we can move quickly to get those two first steps in place, the other two steps are going to take us a little bit of time. But I think it's a good initial effort to addressing what should be a formal art program in the city of Williamsburg. Comments?
A lot to chew on, and a lot to consider, because, first I think what comes to mind is, this is something that a lot of folks have been talking about for years, and it's been in our GIOs to consider public arts, and as the manager said, and so I think it's time to do this. I'd like the idea of having public art and murals, just because of the vibrancy and the cultural aspect of it, and the ties to tourism just gives another reason for people to come in and visit the area, find another way to appreciate the area outside of just the historic Colonial Williamsburg. And so if we can add this, arts into the area, I think would be beneficial to the community for all those reasons and more. What's in good taste? I don't know. What's appropriate? I think establishing the Arts Council to have those folks kind of put their eyes on it, I think is a good idea, and then have that go through the process as Mr. Trivette kind of laid out. I think, you'll be able to weed out stuff that may not be deemed appropriate or inappropriate for our community. I don't know that we would want this, on the wall behind the governor's palace. So I think we're heading in the right direction. Funding, I think this council and the councils before have been, committed to funding these types of activities, and it kind of relates to me, to the events. We put money into events so that we can have more cultural experiences downtown that brings people in, and by all accounts, the event that was sponsored by the city over New Year's Eve was a big draw to the area. And that happened because we put money behind it. And I think that's part of our role here. How much money gets spent, and I think Mr. Trivette mentioned that, in lean years, we'd have to cut it back because we have core functions that we need to take care of first and foremost. And fire, police, public works, water, those things need to happen before this happens. And so I think, he's kind of acknowledged that this is not something that, in lean years that we could fund. So I think you're heading in the right direction. Who should be on the council? I have, a blended group of folks in the community. Maybe somebody from city council. I don't know. I have to think about that some more. One of the things that was a concern, and I don't mean to travel on here, but I don't want the process to be so long that just stymies it. You get too many cooks in the kitchen, and then it's unproductive. But at the same time, you want some oversight. So, kind of like having maybe the ARB, somebody from the ARB, and somebody on the Planning Commission on the council, much the way we did with the Grant Review Committee. You bring in those organizations so that there's some communication that way versus having to go to the ARB and the Planning Commission as a separate part of the application for this. So I think we're heading in the right direction.
Well, and if I may just, you bring up an interesting point, although you didn't really explicitly say it. It made me think
Well, I left it for you, Paul.
potentially bringing another possible member, somebody from the Grant Review Committee. So who's already thinking about tourism and the impact on tourism.
Thank you for the presentation, Drew. I have a couple questions that are legal related and some that kind of venture more into how the city might want to craft a policy. So Barbie might want to hold on. I have a few questions. Chris, in terms of certificate for appropriateness, we do that already with the ARB. So every time someone submits an application, ARB denies or approves. That is, in a sense, a certificate of appropriateness. Am I right in saying that? Or is it something different that other localities are doing?
It's a certificate of compliance with the ARB guidelines.
How's that different from certificate of appropriateness?
Well, you probably need to talk to your planning director. It's essentially the same thing.
Okay. Well, the reason
I gotta get some clarification here. In the ARB's case, they have explicit guidelines about what is and is not allowed, and they apply those specific guidelines to a case. And if it's not allowed in the guidelines, it doesn't happen. In what we're talking about here is something that's much more squishy. They're only talking about building materials, colors, architectural design. This is a lot more complicated.
Right, but the certificate in the end, from my understanding, is if it's coming out from that body, it is what it is from the state statute, right?
Well, so this doesn't have a state statute behind it. The
ARB does.
Right.
Right. So certificate of compliance, certificate of appropriateness, however you want to put it, that would be subject to a fairly debatable standard in court. But then you might have someone, depending on the definition of the mural art, challenge it on the First Amendment grounds.
Yes.
That will the constitutional issue will supersede. So in your experience, or kind of the case law you may or may have not seen with the definition of mural art, I guess it's in the second slide, if you can switch to that. Is it better to withstand a legal challenge with time, manner, place regulations with a more broad definition? Maybe not as broad as the Oxford Dictionary's definition, or is it more specific like you see in Los Angeles's? It's hard to tell.
This is a hard question.
Yeah,
right?
because it's so vague, right?
Because beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
Art is expressive speech. And one of the reasons why there are so many definitions of this is because so many different people are trying to get their hands wrapped around how do you regulate expressive speech.
Right.
Because whether it's commercial speech or it's not commercial speech, it's still going to be protected by the First Amendment. And if you say you can have a public arts program and you can put a mural on the wall, the broader you make the guidelines for that, the more you're going to have to accept what may not be deemed to be in good taste by someone.
Right.
These are gray areas and they're very blurry lines. And so if you say, okay, we're going to accept a wide variety of things that some people may like and some people may not like, and the cameras and then the whatever that was in Drew's last slide are very different, but they're both art and they're both expressive speech, and you need to make sure that you don't limit yourself in a way that you can't defend it. If you're regulating content, it's harder to defend that.
And the reason why I didn't mean to confuse folks with legalese, that, I find it intriguing that localities have used it through the certificate of appropriateness, because it's used with a fairly legislative approach that courts generally defer to legislative bodies like city councils, as opposed to quasi-boards like Board of Zoning Appeals. You just have to do an undue hardship standard. But then that can get superseded if someone had a good First Amendment claim, a constitutional claim. I just wanted to, that might be a conversation that, in terms of regulations, you want to find that neutral time, manner, place, whatever is appropriate. I don't know the First Amendment. I never took that class. But it's just, I think it definitely is worth some sort of a thought from our standpoint to make sure that we patch that up, especially as we're considering like advertising limits. Or am I getting too ahead of myself? It's just a thought that I had.
You're going to run into similar problems both in the context of advertising and in the context of what is art.
Right.
And what is good art versus what is not good art, and what is a reasonable limitation on expressive speech versus an unreasonable limitation on expressive speech.
Right.
And I'm not going to sit here and say that you're going to adopt a public arts program and there's not going to be challenge to it if somebody wants to put a mural on a wall and the committee or the planning commission or the ARB or the city council says, I don't like that art because, that you may not have a challenge to that, because this is one of those areas of law where there's an awful lot of scope for that.
But I guess the good takeaway is if we did do it through a certificate of appropriateness, we'll probably win, because courts generally defer to what bodies decide on. But that's just something of a thought exercise I think that's important to at least address or touch on. Not certainly meant to take over the whole meeting, but enough of my law school stuff. In terms of some of the unintended consequences, Mr. Trivette, with these other localities, you've seen they have sanctioned public arts programs, but have you seen an uptick of illegal graffitiing or illegal, public art around the city just because maybe the artist didn't know, or about the regulations, or people just thought, oh, it's here, so I can do it there as well?
I found plenty of examples of places where a business owner hired a muralist to do a mural without first looking into the regulation. But I can't say that was because the city had already adopted a public art program. I think that would have happened regardless.
That might be something you want to consider. In terms of process, I share Vice Mayor Ponce's concerns with having such a lengthy process. Art is something, and from the few artist friends that I have, they don't want to be inhibited by process, right? They want to have free range for creativity. And I think the focus of what we should do for public arts, I mean, at least from how I see it, is that potential tourism draw. Ms. Ramsey shared an article with all of us saying how public art programs and murals have become destination drivers. But if we're just doing a public arts program for the sake of saying we're just putting up public art, we should be bold. We should try to encourage those artists to want to put in those ideas and not feel like they're going to be inhibited by whatever process it may be. Now, that said, we ought to have a process, and I think including someone from the grant review committee is certainly a great idea, but let's find some way to streamline it. I'm even comfortable maybe going as far as saying whatever the Arts Council has is comprised of individuals and maybe representatives from different bodies like Planning Commission, ARB, and what's so. Once they decide on that, they can kick it to the City Council. I'm okay with that. Certainly today's just that initial conversation, I hope, but that's something I'd be open to looking as well. Because it's so hard with those folks. I mean, what is really in good taste, as Vice Mayor Pond says? I mean, who knows? We all are subjected to what our views of what is cool may be, but there might be a lot more into research with that. I mean, with Nashville, I'd be curious to know, with the angel wings that I always see on social media, what drives that? Is it from a few selected folks that serve on the Arts Council, or was it driven something a little bit more by the market or by someone's intuition or creativity? Certainly would not want to inhibit that as well. And then finally, in terms of funding, I know this is a city structure. I don't know if other localities have attached a nonprofit aspect where people who may want to give money or provide funding for public arts can do so and maybe receive the tax benefits. Even if not, it'd be an interesting idea of encouraging folks. I know we've got some really dedicated artists here who may want to devote time and maybe also money, and that could be a great avenue for them to donate as well. That's all I had. Thank you.
Well, I just have a few comments related to the unanswered questions. As far as locations, I think that based on our conversation today, that we can't really decide what locations might be appropriate or not without waiting for the applicants to come through, because I think that there are a lot of options that, as we talked this morning, a couple places in the downtown area, a couple places in Midtown Road that might be suitable. So I think that the locations, which is what I thought fell under the appropriateness certificate that they were talking about, as opposed to the content, would come through in the process. As far as the council, the Public Arts Council, I agree that maybe having someone on there from the Planning Commission or from the EDA and structured similar to the TDF Grant Review Committee might be a consideration, because that group of people seem to work well, and some of the questions and concerns that would have come up if it had gone to planning and then gone to ARB were taken care of with the whole group and not have to be punted back to them. Whether a city council member be on that council or the applications come to city council, I haven't made a determination on. And as far as the process, I think obviously there needs to be a process. I think that it's going to be hard to know going at the beginning how it's all going to work. We have to accept the fact that it might be a little trial of error. I do think we need to have a funding plan for it, because in this case it's sort of, what do they say, go big or stay home, that we can't expect this to be an economic driver or a place that people want to have their picture taken or to visit if we don't put some oomph behind it and have something pretty major. And I think we all recognize that we are behind the curve as far as public art and murals go in the state, and particularly in a lot of other areas. And as Vice Mayor Pond said, that this does become not only a draw for tourism, but also for residents, and it really impacts and goes to all of placemaking. And as far as advertising limits, again, I think that perhaps being a little bit more on the, let's wait and see what some of the applicants are before we make a final, because that can be a very gray line also. So just my few comments.
Oh, a couple comments and questions. If we had a viable arts district, wouldn't we see this proposal coming from those residents as pushing it forward? I mean, we talk about a lot of these programs, but we don't see a constituent group actually advocating for them. So who's the constituent group that's advocating for this program?
Well, in this case, it's really twofold. Number one, the city council said, as part of their GIO program, this is something we want you to go and figure out a process for. And then secondly, we've had at least 2 applications since I've been with the city where people wanted to do murals and we didn't have a process. The first and the most recent is Midtown Row. Another one is the Meadery in the same area.
I think at this point, we have other priorities for our CIP funding, especially with public safety facilities and the school district requests. And my suggestion is to discuss this more in the context of when we're looking at ARB guideline revisions and tourist development grant process. You know, let people propose this as one of the tourist development projects, and then we can review it that way. But don't have a separate program for it.
So from the TDF?
TDF, yeah. I'm not in favor of designating 1% of CIP for this program.
Is that it?
Yeah.
A couple of questions, comments. On the location, I'd be more in favor of, these are the areas of the city where it's allowed to put public art, and can you distinguish between murals and public art? So we might say some areas are appropriate for murals, and there, maybe as an example, the closer you get to the historic area, perhaps less appropriate, not trying to define it, but I think that would be one of the bigger areas we'd want to protect. But within that area that we determine you can locate these, there still has to be an approval of the location within that area. Because one thing we haven't talked about, and I don't know if it's part of anybody's ordinance, is there a public safety review of this? That if you have an intersection that's potentially confusing already, do you really want something that's going to capture the driver's eye and have them focus on anywhere but the road? So just give that some consideration, if that makes sense. On the advertising question, I came away unsure if you were saying you want a more broad definition that doesn't include an advertising limitation, but you want the group that's reviewing it to apply a limitation that's not in the statute.
Right. I think my preference, if it was just up to me, would be to use the Portland's definition of mural art, and then allow the process to ferret out those applications that are traditional advertising. Because what I wouldn't want would be, a business sign added into an art piece, because then the business moves and it becomes irrelevant. And I don't find it particularly attractive. But I think in the examples that I showed, like with the cameras, it's on a camera shop and the man smoking a cigar, those weren't branded in any particular way, but they do reference products that are sold on site. And I think there's a distinct difference there. And I think that our process can make that determination as opposed to us trying to define it, which would ultimately limit the applications we might receive.
But I think it makes the process less defensible in the case of somebody having an issue with what was and was not approved, because there's no guideline that's being applied.
Right. Agreed.
Okay. Funding, you and I had this conversation earlier. I don't like the idea of committing a certain amount that we may or may not give. That to me is not a commitment, and it's a disingenuous statement. I think if we're going to make some kind of commitment, it ought to be, we will fund this program to the degree that we and future councils are able to do so out of whatever funding stream we want to provide. But to say we're going to provide 1% of the CIP, and I know, Ted, I appreciate you don't like that idea, but just using that as an example, we'll commit to fund 1% of the CIP, and then next year we don't do it because we don't have, that's not a commitment. And I think it leads to expectations that won't be met. And I'd rather avoid that. So again, but if my colleagues think differently, I defer.
I think that's a really important point.
The last comment I make is to Councilman Zhang's question about if somebody wanted to contribute. We do have the community, the beautification fund within the community foundation that people can contribute to, and that money could be used.
It could be used for public art.
I think that where you don't get much of a benefit is if you're the artist and you contribute, you can't, there's no deduction for your work. It's only for the cost of materials.
Right.
So it doesn't do them much good. But for somebody who wanted to support it financially, we have a way they could get that.
And that fund is totally fine to use it for
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
In fact,
awesome.
I meant to mention that.
So
And it
those-
would
sorry.
also perhaps give us another way to sort of advertise that
That's right.
fund is out there
Right.
and could be used.
Oh, and let me just clarify, by saying I didn't like the idea of committing the 1% maybe, that doesn't mean I'm not in favor of funding this. It's the way we state how we're going to fund it, I think, from my perspective, we need to work on.
I think there are a lot of ways to fund it. That was just the example that I liked because it was pretty straightforward and consistent with what other communities have done.
And I think council generally does follow through its obligations. I don't want to speak for you, Mr. Trivette, but I guess you were suggesting that councils, in future councils, because of our legislative powers, we could just undo it, right?
Right.
As anything, right? But we generally do well with maintaining our commitments.
And if there are concerns, maybe start with 0.5% or something, so that, it would be likely that.
Or an initial seed amount.
Yeah,
And
that's a
then
good
some
idea.
ongoing funding.
I like that
If
idea,
you
too.
need some money to get it going.
Yeah.
That's true.
So maybe to the seed amount, not really making the determination as to where the funds come from. Because I can see a path forward in the future that, it comes from the Tourism Development Fund, whatever that amount may be. So it's not allocated just from the CIP.
Or tourism fund, it doesn't have to be TDF,
Right.
Other comments?
Well, I was just mentioned it this morning, Virginia Beach has those mermaids. I think we should have fifers and drummers around town that people can sponsor and paint.
Okay, thank you for
Like
that.
the Chicago Bulls.
But there's a lot of value, I think, to something like that. And when you talk about public art in the historic area, the statue that gets probably more pictures taken with it is the one in the historic area of Thomas Jefferson.
That's right.
But that's why I said murals are probably what we don't want
Right,
closer.
right.
That's
But-
if you don't count the stocks.
That's true, that's true. That's true. But if we combine the two,
Okay, city council communications, anything anybody would like to share from their liaison assignments?
No.
Schedule of meetings, Mr. Trivette, anything you want to highlight?
Just that we have the business roundtable on January the 14th. The city offices will be closed for the January 20th Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And just want to make note that we have selected a date for our annual budget retreat. It'll be February the 11th at 11 a.m. here in this building. We are looking at using the work session in February as the meeting that was requested by the council for a joint session with the ARB to talk about the kickoff of their design guideline process.
And do we have a topic for the business roundtable?
I can't remember off the top of my head. Yuri, can you tell us who is the speaker at the business roundtable?
yes, yeah, that's it from NASA.
Okay, this takes us to open forum. Anybody who'd like to address council, welcome to come forward. State your name and address. 5 minutes. Seeing no one, do we have an item for closed session?
Yes, sir, we do. If you're ready, I'll move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning appointments to boards and commissions.
Second.
Mr. Trivette?
Oh, yes, the calling of the roll. I already put that sheet away.
It's Mr. Maslin.
Well, I want to get the order right. Okay, here we go. Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Friley?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zane?
Aye.
Council will take a brief break and reconvene in closed session.